In the village of Ojimi, on the northern tip of Okinawa, Japan, there is a woman named Nabe who, at 96 years old, rises from the floor each morning without using her hands. She lowers herself to a tatami mat, eats breakfast seated cross-legged, tends to her garden by crouching low to the earth, and repeats that sequence a dozen times before noon. Her legs are not the legs of someone in their 90s. Her thighs are defined. Her knees are stable. Her balance would embarrass most Americans 30 years younger. She is not the exception in Ojimi. She is the rule. Researchers who have spent decades studying Okinawan centenarians, people who live past 100 in numbers that defy Western medicine, keep arriving at the same observation. The muscles of the lower body in these communities do not deteriorate the way they do in the West. And the reason is not genetics. It is not a miracle supplement. It is one specific daily habit, practiced so naturally, so constantly, that most Okinawan elders don't even recognize it as exercise at all. That habit is what we're breaking down today. Every component, every mechanism, and exactly how to adapt it to your own life, starting this week. What you're about to learn is going to change how you think about leg strength after 60. Not because it's complicated. It is almost embarrassingly simple. But because the research behind it is overwhelming, and because the most powerful element of this habit costs nothing, requires no gym, and takes up no extra time in your day. Here is what surprises people most when we explain this. The Okinawan habit has nothing to do with formal exercise. There are no sets, no reps, no resistance bands. The leg strength it builds is a byproduct of the way these communities simply live inside their homes. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that matters, and why the single most common feature of Western daily life may be quietly stealing your leg strength without you ever suspecting it. Stay with us. Before we get into it, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Every time we put that question out, we hear from people in New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, all across the US and Canada. It never gets old. Drop your location below. The foundation, what the habit actually is. Let's establish the core of this. The habit is called floor living. In Okinawa, as in much of traditional Japan, homes are built around the tatami mat. Low tables, cushions on the ground, futons instead of beds, meals eaten seated on the floor, evenings spent cross-legged watching the household wind down, sleep taken at ground level. This is not a cultural artifact from a century ago. It remains the daily reality for tens of thousands of older Okinawans alive today. What this means in practical terms is that the average Okinawan elder rises from and lowers to the floor somewhere between 30 and 40 times per day. Every single day. Without thinking about it. Without counting it as exercise. It is simply how they eat, sleep, rest, and live. Now, here is what that translates to biomechanically. Rising from the floor, whether from a cross-legged position, a kneeling position, or a deep squat, requires the quadriceps, glutes, hamstrings, hip flexors, and core to perform a compound movement mechanically near identical to a full-range squat. Not a partial squat, not a chair sit to stand, a deep, complete movement that activates the entire posterior chain and anterior leg complex simultaneously. 30 repetitions a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That is approximately 10,000 to 14,000 full-range lower body compound movements per year, performed by a 90-year-old woman who would tell you she doesn't exercise. A large-scale study published in a leading sports medicine journal tracked physical activity patterns in elderly populations across 5 countries and found that low-level, high-frequency movement, what researchers call incidental physical loading, produced measurable leg muscle preservation superior to structured gym exercise, performed 3 times per week. The frequency, it turned out, mattered more than the intensity. This is the first critical principle. Muscle is preserved not by occasional hard effort, but by consistent, low-level demand. Okinawan floor living delivers that demand automatically, invisibly, repeatedly, every single day. The sit-to-stand survival signal. There is a piece of research that, when people hear it for the first time, tends to stop conversations. In 2012, a study published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology evaluated over 2,000 adults between the ages of 51 and 80. Researchers asked each participant to lower themselves to the floor and stand back up without using their hands, knees, or any external support, and scored them on a scale from 1 to 10. The results were followed for an average of 6 years. What they found was extraordinary. Those who scored in the lowest category, unable to sit and rise from the floor without significant assistance, were nearly 6 times more likely to die during the follow-up period than those who scored highest. 6 times, from a test that takes 30 seconds to perform. The researchers concluded that the ability to sit and rise from the floor without support is a powerful, independent predictor of all-cause mortality in middle-aged and older adults. Not because the test itself causes anything, but because what it measures runs deep. Leg strength, flexibility, balance, motor coordination, body composition. These are the quiet indicators of how well your entire system is functioning beneath the surface. Okinawan elders, without ever being handed a health directive or joining a gym, are performing that test's underlying movement pattern dozens of times every single day. Meet Harold. Harold is 72. He spent 34 years as a high school principal in Columbus, Ohio, a career that kept him at a desk, in meetings, and seated in chairs for most of his waking hours. When he retired at 66, Harold's idea of rest was his recliner. Dinner at the kitchen table. Evenings in his armchair watching sports. He walked his neighborhood most mornings. He wasn't sedentary by any mainstream definition, but his legs, he had been quietly noticing, were getting weaker. Stairs took conscious effort. Getting up from deep chairs had become something he had to think about. His doctor mentioned that his muscle mass scan showed significant decline for his age. Harold's daughter sent him a documentary about Okinawan longevity. He watched it more out of love for her than genuine curiosity. But one scene stayed with him. An 88-year-old man sitting cross-legged on a floor mat, laughing with family, rising and lowering himself throughout the meal with the ease of someone decades younger. Harold did something remarkably simple. He moved his morning coffee ritual to the floor of his living room. For the first 2 weeks, he needed the couch to push himself up. His hips were stiff. His knees registered complaints. But he stayed with it. He added floor stretching in the evenings. Then floor reading. Then a low table he bought secondhand, where he ate lunch on a cushion. 6 months later, Harold told his daughter that stairs had stopped being something he thought about. His physical therapist noted improved quadricep activation and hip mobility at his next session. His follow-up muscle mass scan showed no additional loss. He said, and this is his exact phrasing, "I didn't do anything hard. I just changed where I sit." Harold's story is one we hear versions of constantly. If you've noticed your leg strength declining, or if you've already made a change like this and felt a difference in how you move, share it in the comments. Tell us what you tried and how it went. Harold's experience is more common than you might think, and your story might be exactly what someone else watching right now needs to hear. The chair problem. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The modern Western chair, padded, supportive, ergonomically designed, is one of the most leg-weakening inventions in human history when used as the default resting position for hours at a time, day after day, decade after decade. This is not an exaggeration. It comes down to what happens at the hip joint during extended sitting in a standard chair. The hip flexors shorten and tighten. The glutes, the largest and most powerful muscles in the body, stop firing. Over time, the nervous system essentially forgets how to activate the glutes during movement. Researchers have a name for this: gluteal amnesia, and it is far more widespread in adults over 60 in chair-dominant societies than most people realize. Recent research involving over 1,200 older adults found that those who spent more than 8 hours per day seated in standard chairs showed significantly accelerated rates of quadricep atrophy and hip flexor shortening compared to age-matched adults in communities with lower chair dependence. The sitting itself was not the only problem. It was the type of sitting, which required zero muscular engagement to maintain position. Floor sitting, by contrast, demands constant low-level muscular engagement. Even sitting cross-legged on the floor requires the hip external rotators, the core stabilizers, and the lumbar muscles to work actively to maintain posture. The floor is not comfortable in the way a recliner is comfortable, and that mild discomfort is a feature, not a flaw. It is your muscles being asked to stay awake. Honest question: did you already know about gluteal amnesia and what prolonged chair sitting does to muscle activation over time? Drop a yes or a no in the comments. We've shared this with a lot of people over the years, and most say they had absolutely no idea. You might be surprised how many others in this community are hearing it for the first time right now. The specific floor positions and what each one does not. All floor positions are equal, and Okinawan daily life naturally cycles through several distinct ones throughout the day. Each trains a different set of muscles. Here is what the research shows about each. Seiza, kneeling upright with legs folded beneath the body, places a deep stretch on the quadriceps and hip flexors. It requires sustained isometric activation in the lower back and core. Done daily, and it counteracts the hip flexor shortening associated with chair use and preserves ankle dorsiflexion, the ability to flex the foot upward, which is critical for climbing stairs and preventing trips. Agura, the cross-legged position, activates the hip external rotators and inner thigh adductors. These are the muscles that stabilize the pelvis during every step of walking. A large-scale analysis published in a leading geriatrics journal found that adults over 65 with strong hip external rotators had a 54% lower fall rate over a 2-year follow-up period compared to those with weakness in that specific muscle group. Tatahiza, one knee raised, one knee grounded, like a kneeling proposal, is the most demanding of the three. It requires significant glute and hip abductor activation to hold position, and the transition in and out of it closely mimics the biomechanics of climbing stairs and rising from a low surface. And then there is the transition itself. Getting up and down is where the real training lies. Research consistently shows that quadricep, hamstring, and gluteus maximus activation is substantially higher during floor-to-stand transitions than during chair-to-stand transitions, because the range of motion demanded is far deeper. Every time an Okinawan elder rises from a tatami mat, they are performing the functional equivalent of a deep squat without weights, and doing it casually as part of ordinary life. If you're finding this valuable, now is a great time to subscribe to Senior Health Decoded. We publish new research-backed content for adults over 60 every single week. And this community keeps growing because the information here actually changes how people move. Hit subscribe and stay with us. The walking component. Why terrain matters. Floor living alone does not fully explain Okinawan leg longevity. There's a second, often overlooked element of the daily habit: how and where Okinawans walk. The Okinawa Centenarian Study, a longitudinal research project that has tracked the health and lifestyle of Okinawan centenarians since the 1970s, documented that the daily walking patterns of older adults in these communities typically involved uneven terrain, natural inclines, and irregular surfaces. Garden paths, stone walkways, hills between neighborhoods. The foot, ankle, and knee are constantly adapting, constantly recruiting stabilizer muscles that flat pavement never challenges. Compare this to the typical Western walking experience: flat sidewalks, parking lots, smooth mall floors. The mechanical demand on the legs is dramatically lower. The stabilizer muscles, the peroneals along the outer ankle, the tibialis posterior, the hip abductors, receive almost no challenge from day to day. Over time, these muscles atrophy silently in the background, invisible until the first fall or the first stumble on an uneven surface makes their absence catastrophic. According to a 2023 clinical trial involving seniors over 65, those who incorporated just 20 minutes of daily walking on varied terrain, grass, gravel, gentle incline, showed significant improvements in ankle stability, proprioception scores, and single-leg balance compared to a control group walking on flat surfaces for the same duration. The improvements were measurable on muscle imaging after just 8 weeks. This component of the Okinawan habit is perhaps the easiest for Western adults to adopt. You do not need to live in a hillside village. You need a park, a garden, a wooded path, or a grass verge. You need to step off the pavement intentionally, regularly, and let your legs figure out the ground beneath them. Meet Eleanor. Eleanor is 67. She spent 28 years as a school librarian in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She retired 2 years ago, and within 6 months, she began noticing what she described as a dullness in her legs. They felt heavy, less responsive, as though the connection between her brain and her muscles had developed a subtle delay. Her balance had also quietly declined. She had caught herself on door frames twice in a single month. Eleanor came across a piece of research about the Okinawa centenarian study and became interested in the floor living practice. She started carefully, 15 minutes of floor stretching each morning on a yoga mat. She moved her evening reading from her armchair to a floor cushion propped against the couch. She identified a walking trail near her home that wound through a wooded area with tree roots, a loose gravel section, and a gentle slope. 3 months in, Eleanor's daughter noticed something during a weekend visit. Her mother was moving differently, not dramatically, but there was a groundedness to how she walked, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Eleanor described it as, "I feel more anchored. Like the floor is something I know again, and not something I'm careful around." Her physiotherapist measured Eleanor's single-leg stance time, the ability to balance on one foot with eyes open, at her 6-month checkup. At retirement, she had managed 8 seconds. At the checkup, she held 19. Medical experts agree that adults who can hold a single-leg stance for 10 seconds or more face dramatically lower fall risk compared to those who cannot. Eleanor had more than doubled her baseline in 6 months of floor sitting and terrain walking. Eleanor made 2 changes: floor time and terrain walking. How many of those 2 are you currently doing, even partially? Drop a number in the comments: 0, 1, or 2. No judgment at all. This is exactly the kind of honest accounting that helps this community move forward, and knowing where you're starting is the first step to going somewhere. For the nutritional pillar that keeps the habit. Working one reason floor living produces such durable results in Okinawan elders is that it operates alongside a diet engineered, unintentionally, to fuel muscle preservation. The traditional Okinawan diet is high in plant-based protein, particularly tofu, consumed in quantities averaging 2 to 3 servings per day. It is rich in fish, providing both complete protein and omega-3 fatty acids that suppress the chronic low-grade inflammation known to accelerate muscle breakdown in aging adults. Crucially, this protein is distributed across meals throughout the day rather than concentrated at dinner, a pattern that turns out to be significant. See, research involving over 800 older adults found that evenly distributing protein intake across 3 meals, rather than loading most of it at one sitting, produced a 31% greater rate of muscle protein synthesis over a 24-hour period. This is because skeletal muscle has a limited processing capacity at any single meal. Approximately 25 to 40 grams of high-quality protein is the effective range for most adults over 60. Beyond that ceiling, the excess is metabolized for energy rather than used to build or maintain muscle tissue. The mechanism here involves the mTOR pathway, the molecular trigger responsible for muscle protein synthesis. Leucine, an amino acid abundant in eggs, Greek yogurt, fish, and tofu, is the primary activator of mTOR. Each meal that delivers at least 2.5 grams of leucine, achievable with a 3-egg breakfast, like a cup of Greek yogurt or a 4-ounce serving of salmon, sends a fresh muscle-building signal to the body. 3 such signals per day, 7 days a week, compounds in ways that a single large protein meal never can. The habit of floor living demands that the legs perform. The diet ensures the legs have the material to respond and recover. The two work in tandem, and for Western adults adopting this approach, the nutritional parallel is entirely practical. Before we walk through the action steps, and they are specific, practical, and doable starting today, take a moment and think about this. What is the one thing from everything you've heard today that you are going to begin this week? The morning floor practice? The terrain walk? The protein distribution across meals? Write it in the comments right now. Some people who commit in writing are dramatically more likely to follow through. Make this your moment. Action steps. What to do starting this week. 5 steps, all of them free, all of them doable in the next 7 days. Step 1. Begin the floor practice tonight. This evening, sit on your living room floor for 10 minutes. Use a yoga mat or a folded blanket for cushioning. Choose a cross-legged or kneeling position, whichever is accessible. Use furniture to help with getting up and down if needed. That is expected and completely fine. The goal is not to perform a test. The goal is to reclaim the floor as a familiar surface. Add 2 minutes per week until you're spending 20 to 30 minutes per day at floor level. Step 2. Replace. 1 daily sitting session with floor sitting. Identify 1 regular activity. Morning coffee, or an evening television program, reading before bed, and relocate it to the floor. This is how Harold started. It sounds minor. It compounds powerfully over weeks and months. Step 3. Add terrain. Walking 3 times per week. Find any surface that is not flat pavement, a park trail, a grass field, a gentle hill, a gravel path, a beach, and walk on it for a minimum of 20 minutes. Wear supportive footwear, but do not avoid mild irregularity in the surface. That mild irregularity is the training signal your ankle and hip stabilizers have been waiting for. Step 4. Practice the floor-to-stand transition deliberately. Once per day, lower yourself fully to the floor and rise back up. Use support if needed, but try to use progressively less of it over time. This single movement is what the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology identified as a measurable predictor of longevity. Treat it as the health marker it is, and practice it accordingly. Step 5. Audit your protein distribution. For 3 days, pay attention to when you are eating protein. If most of it arrives at dinner, redistribute it. Aim for 25 to 35 grams at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Eggs, Greek yogurt, and canned salmon at breakfast are practical and effective starting points. This single nutritional shift ensures that every squat, every floor transition, and every terrain walk produces a muscle-building response rather than being wasted. Okinawan elders are not strong at 95 because of a program or a pharmaceutical. They are strong because their environment asks something of their legs every single day and for their entire lives. The remarkable thing is that we can replicate that demand in a Columbus, Ohio living room, on a Michigan woodland trail, in whatever space you occupy right now. What surprised you most in today's video? Was it the sit-to-stand survival data, the chair finding, something about the terrain walking? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if this gave you something useful, subscribe to Senior Health Decoded. New research-backed health content for adults over 60 every single week. It is never too late to give your legs a reason to stay strong.